Celia squeezed her eyes shut, overwhelmed with emotion. How she liked these Italian shoes, which she had tried on this morning. Natural leather, versatile black colour, comfortable medium-sized heel. You could wear them for any occasion. The sales consultant mentioned that this pair was made at a factory with a century-old history, using time-tested techniques from the European fashion capital. But Celia barely listened to these details. These shoes, any young woman's dream, had to become hers. Especially since the elderly cobbler working in the booth around the corner had warned her that her old pair wouldn't survive another repair. She floated home, imagining how perfectly these shoes would complement her holiday dress. Though perhaps a mother of 3 shouldn't obsess over new things, she was still a young woman who cared about fashion. Especially since she wouldn't need to juggle maternity leaves anymore. She was going to leave the nursery behind, rejoin society and return to work. Even little Johnny had turned 3. Celia Nicholson had been married to Eddie for 8 years now. The woman felt truly fortunate. She had 3 energetic, mischievous boys, between 3 and 7 years old, plus a wonderful mother-in-law, with whom she shared a warm relationship. How many women could claim such domestic blessings? Humming a cheerful tune, Celia prepared soup in the kitchen. The family lived in a spacious 3-bedroom apartment she had inherited from her grandparents, whom she only vaguely remembered. Her grandfather had died young, and her grandmother followed shortly after. Since Celia's parents had their own small apartment, they had preserved this space for their daughter. And this place came in handy when Celia got married to Eddie. Before, he had lived with his mother, Patricia, a tiny old apartment on the outskirt of the city. So, after the marriage, Patricia, now alone, kept living in her tiny place filled with collectibles, working as a grocery store cashier. She was satisfied with her life, though she rarely helped her daughter-in-law with the grandchildren or visited her son's family. She never interfered in their lives. She devoted all her unused affection to her cat, Leo. Celia skimmed foam from the chicken broth and retrieved a package of noodles. She had recently discovered this brand. Their noodles tasted homemade without the effort. She chopped onions and dill, then added grated cooked carrots. Enticing aromas filled the kitchen. Dinner would be ready soon. Eddie and the boys loved this soup. She planned to feed everyone before discussing the purchase of the shoes with her husband. Yes, he was their sole provider so far, but this purchase was necessary. She would explain how quality shoes last longer and look better. He wouldn't be embarrassed to be seen with her wearing them. But when Eddie came home late that evening, he was troubled and ate without appetite, lost in thought. Celia had massaged his back and brought him thyme tea, but his mood remained dark. How could she bring up the shoes now? It seemed impossible. He lay on the bed watching TV and ignoring her. Being sensible, Celia decided to postpone the conversation. Not wanting to disturb her husband's rest, she took the children to the nursery to watch film strips on the old projector. It was a cherished part of her childhood. Many fairy tales lay neatly arranged in a decorative metal tin. Celia always looked forward to seeing which story the boys would choose. She was grateful they didn't spend all day with tablets or television. The images projected onto the white sheet hanging on the closet seemed more magical, more real somehow. Or was that just her childhood nostalgia speaking? Suddenly, Celia reflected on how little she had worked in her chosen profession since graduating. Right at school, she was nicknamed our florist, but the girl really had a natural talent for creating beautiful plant arrangements, from dried herbariums to elaborate bouquets. Every flower seemed to bloom more vibrantly in her hands, and because of the flowers, she met with Eddie. She was doing her internship at a flower shop when he came in, to buy a birthday bouquet for his mother's 60th. Though Celia hadn't yet met her future mother-in-law Patricia, she had somehow instinctively known exactly which flowers to choose. It turned out that the live present from her son became the decoration not only of the table, but also of the entire evening at the cafe, where they celebrated the special occasion. All 6 guests admired it throughout the evening, asking where he had bought this exquisite marvel. Eddie was immediately taken with the enthusiastic young florist. She blushed at compliments and touched the flowers with great tenderness. So, the next day, he asked her on a date. Their romance blossomed and flourished. Eddie felt quite the gentleman, courting this young, inexperienced person. Being 12 years older than Celia seemed natural enough. Though not particularly experienced himself, he had known other women before. The idea to marry young, pretty Celia came from his mother, who argued sensibly, "The girl is head over heels in love with you, and you're clearly smitten too. She's healthy, strong, reliable, and by the way, at nearly 35, it's rather unseemly to remain a bachelor. People will think you're incapable of managing life. You should have children by now." Celia was perfect as a candidate for an obedient wife, and Eddie agreed with his mother's arguments. She also owned a 3-bedroom apartment, meaning they wouldn't have to live with either set of parents or spend on renting. This final detail propelled him toward the marriage. After the wedding, Celia quickly became pregnant, learned to maintain a good household, and cooked wonderfully. She always welcomed him warmly, and he accepted with equanimity when she bore him 3 boys. They struggled financially, living paycheck to paycheck, like most ordinary people. They weren't the first, nor would they be the last. However, it never truly occurred to Eddie that providing for a family with 3 sons was his direct responsibility. Though trained as a designer, he was a mediocre specialist who barely managed his work and saw no need to improve his skills. Everything proceeded neither well nor poorly, and that was good enough for him. Besides, Celia always found a way, making something from nothing, sewing clothes for the younger boys from their older brothers' garments. He considered himself lucky that Celia never demanded fur coats, diamonds, or expensive vacations. She felt especially pleased last year when he received a bonus, and they managed a trip to the nearest seaside. Yes, his mother had been right. He had found an excellent wife and homemaker who was content with little. Unlike his colleagues' wives, she got along with everyone, and the boys were growing up wonderfully. Yes, I should do something nice for my mother too. We are working on a major new contract at work. If it comes through, then it's decided. I'll send Mum to a health resort. She could improve her health and socialise, thought Eddie once. Patricia had raised her son alone after her hapless husband divorced her when she mentioned her second pregnancy. He was a poet, a creative soul who had published a collection dedicated to love, duty and choice. After that, Eddie's father's muse deserted him. She went elsewhere, and the unfortunate poet predictably sought solace at the bottom of a glass. Patricia, then working as a saleswoman, was exhausted, but supported both husband and son without complaint. After her store shift, she used to rush to clean stairwells in the neighbouring building. She couldn't float in the clouds beside her husband. She loved her Eddie dearly, and that's why she rejoiced at her second pregnancy. Her son would have a sibling. She would let her husband go his way, confident she could manage alone. But her dreams of a second child were not to be. In the neighbourhood where she worked part-time, the asphalt collapsed, forming a hole. Though repairs weren't part of her duties, Celia couldn't ignore it when she imagined a child falling in. She pushed there a wheelbarrow of sand, trying to fill the hollow, at least partially. The heavy buckets and chronic fatigue took their toll. Doctors couldn't stop the bleeding that followed. Patricia lost not only her second child, but also any chance of future pregnancies. She grew dark with grief. Only her Eddie, now her sole joy, kept her going. Patricia didn't raise Eddie as a typical mama's boy. On the contrary, they lived modestly, without delicacies, fashionable clothes, or coveted electronic toys. He was among the last in his class to get a second-hand computer and mobile phone. Eventually, Patricia gave up scrubbing stairwells and became a weekend housekeeper for two wealthy families in the same building. And at the store, now a supermarket, she moved up to head cashier. Patricia held firm to her principle that even hard-raised children owe nothing to their parents. Perhaps a flawed concept, but Eddie never heard her say, "When you grow up, you'll support me properly. I've spent my whole life on you, just to have someone to bring me a glass of water in my old age." Indeed, Eddie grew into an unselfish man. Yet he had another shortcoming. He was a typical infantile, and even as an adult, he was in no hurry to become mature. Since childhood, he had always waited for his mother to make decisions for him. He couldn't choose whom to be at the New Year's matinee, or what to write about in free topic essays. He even struggled to decide between porridge or a sausage sandwich for breakfast. His academic performance was mediocre, and his mother had no time to check his lessons. She trusted him completely, though unwisely. Eddie stupidly ignored the school years, perking up only at smelling trouble. When teachers threatened to call his mother, he would half-heartedly improve for a few days. After earning some decent grades, he would immediately slip back, drawing more warnings from teachers. And unfortunately, his mother never had enough time to properly pay attention to his studies. Besides, the woman herself had a flaw, an odd kind of wastefulness. She would spend half her paycheck at the store on unnecessary items, tasteless antiques, unsightly dishes with bright polka dots, flowery linens. To her, these touches brought a hint of luxury into their home. She had no time to notice what her son was truly becoming. On the surface he seemed fine, handsome, conversational, pleasant and polite. But beneath lay an emptiness. Nothing sparkled his interest. Nothing made his eyes light up. His mother would always think and decide for him. By the time she needed to find him a wife, Patricia was exhausted and frequently ill. After all, Eddie was approaching 40 and still unmarried. She worried there would be no one to care for him if her health worsened. She would have continued caring for him herself, but her joints had become torture. By 60, years of hard work had taken their toll. That's why she arranged tea parties with the neighbours' daughters or the store administrator's niece. Her son merely laughed lazily at these matchmaking attempts. "Mother, stop all these schemes," he'd say. "I'm not starving for female attention. I can always find company for a night or two. Why bother with tedious courtship and unnecessary ceremony?" Then came her anniversary and that stunning bouquet of peonies, both delicate and majestic, though not particularly intricate. When combined with green sprigs and leathery leaves, it was mesmerizing. After the celebration, Patricia said firmly to her son, "I don't know where you got this bouquet, son, but my heart tells me it was arranged by caring hands and a big heart. Was the florist a woman?" Eddie thought for a moment. "No, Mum, she was quite young. I watched her create it right there. I knew immediately it was perfect." Patricia seized the moment. "Eddie, you should thank this girl properly for her work. A mother's heart knows best." Something told her this encounter would lead somewhere. The mother welcomed Celia warmly, and she was really delighted in seeing her dear Eddie truly come alive, perhaps even falling in love. She hurried them towards marriage, sensing her health would soon fail completely. She needed to entrust her son to good hands quickly, and her instincts proved right. The young couple lived harmoniously, with grandchildren arriving one after another. Patricia couldn't help physically with the children. More and more often the woman stayed at home, and in order not to be sad with loneliness, she picked up a stray kitten. His reddish colouring reminded her of a small lion, so she named him Leo. That evening, when Celia had been anxious because of upcoming talking to her husband about the purchasing the beautiful shoes for her, she finally put their boisterous children to bed. Then she checked on the peacefully sleeping Eddie. She felt a twinge of regret at not telling him how much she admired the Italian shoes, but that could wait until tomorrow. Besides, the previous week she had sent her resume and portfolio of floral arrangements to various flower shops, hoping of having her own source of income soon. Celia tossed and turned briefly before falling into deep sleep. Morning arrived with its usual routine. She needed to take first-grader Alex to school, drop Terrell at kindergarten, and visit the paediatric clinic for Johnny's paperwork. Thankfully, she'd made pancakes the night before, just a quick microwave heating for breakfast. Celia hesitated to mention new shoes, as Eddie was already in a foul mood. After lunch, while Alex ate his after-school meal, she received an email. A flower shop wanted to interview her. Excited, the woman immediately called her husband with the good news. Extra income would help them significantly. However, Eddie didn't share her excitement. "Are you sure you can manage everything?" "Well, if you think so, give it a try," he said indifferently and hung up. He had his own new interest lately, one that also required financial investment. But it's better for Celia not to know about it. Let her fiddle serenely with her porridge and film strips. Eddie smiled contentedly, lost in pleasant memories. Kathy, a delightful woman he had recently met by chance. With her, Eddie soared above the clouds. For her sake, he would move mountains and pluck stars from the sky. Meanwhile, Celia sighed as she pulled her old shoes from the shelf. How could she meet potential employers tomorrow looking so shabby? She'd have to wear jeans, a sweater, and worn-out sneakers again. At least the sneakers looked decent, despite being cheap. Putting the shoes into the plastic bag, Celia headed to the shoemaker, Mr. Lewis. Perhaps they could be salvaged. They weren't that old, 4 years at most. At Mr. Lewis's stall she found a surprise, a new craftsman, in his 40s, with kind eyes. He was one of those people whose warm gaze makes you feel instantly at ease. The new shoemaker examined Celia's shoes carefully, looked into her eyes and said, "We must give them a second life. Don't worry, it'll work out. But on one condition, you'll let me reshape them to my liking. Agreed?" Celia didn't object, but raised one concern. "It will probably be expensive. I might not be able to afford such repairs." But the master quickly put her mind at ease. "Fixing shoes is my passion, especially challenging cases with beloved pairs. I'll charge you no more than replacing heel tips. I'm curious to see what I can do." The deal was struck. Celia would return for her shoes in 2 weeks. They were unwearable anyway, so she had nothing to lose. That evening she broached the subject of the Italian shoes with her husband. She presented all her arguments, passionately promising Eddie she wouldn't ask for anything else in the near future. But his reaction stunned her. He sarcastically asked if she'd forgotten he was supporting 4 dependents, appealed to her conscience, and reminded her that his mother needed sanatorium treatment for her leg problems, and he was already saving money for her trip. Celia yielded without resistance. Eddie was right about everything, as always. Those Italian shoes would certainly strain their budget. She couldn't jeopardize their financial stability like that. Though the matter was settled, Eddie remained agitated. He forked the meatball on his plate with disdain, criticized the mashed potatoes, then finally softened and said, "Celia, I know you're doing your best for all of us. Just be patient a while longer. Winter's coming, your warm boots are still good, and by spring we'll get you these shoes. You'll find work and earn money." Yes, Eddie didn't want any extra expenses on his family now. Kathy wanted to whisk him away for a countryside weekend, promising unforgettable moments. He realized he had become anything for his mistress. A submissive slave, a walking wallet, a sponsor of her whims. For the first time in his life, Eddie was ready to work tirelessly and better himself. But why had he listened to his mother and married Celia? He deserved more. He'd simply never had such motivation before, because the women in his life, his mother, his wife, had always managed their problems without his effort. The next day, to Celia's surprise, her interview at the charming flower shop went splendidly. They immediately asked her to create several themed bouquets for different occasions. She exceeded expectations. The store's owner's eyes lit up at her creations, and his verdict was positive. "Now I see these portfolio photos are truly your work. You didn't borrow others' arrangements. You think quickly and have rich imagination. Our company often handles the floral design for catered events. If you'd like to start working in this area on Monday." Celia hadn't felt such joy since Eddie's marriage proposal. She felt she was beginning a new, unexplored life full of promise. The offered salary delighted her. She would work diligently, save money, and finally buy those wonderful Italian shoes without asking her husband. Their family's finances would ease. They could send Patricia to the sanatorium quicker and treat themselves occasionally. The next day the woman took little Johnny to kindergarten for a half day. On her way home, in their building's courtyard, she unexpectedly encountered the cobbler who had undertaken to repair her shoes. Though he didn't notice her, she was struck by his unusual gait. Yet there was nothing strange about his using a walking stick. He walked strangely, leaning first on his heels, then rolling his feet forward. Though she thought this cobbler might be ill or injured, she quickly forgot about him because of her excited news, not even noticing when old Mr. Lewis met him at the entrance and helped him up the stairs, firmly holding his elbow. At home, Eddie was unexpectedly delighted by Celia's news. The young and middle sons would go to kindergarten, while Celia's mother would pick up the eldest from school and watch him until Celia took him after her work. This meant for Eddie more time with Kathy, and his wife would finally stop with her constant requests and reminders. Nothing could be better, since he had to endure this woman who had become completely uninteresting to him. "She's happy with her flowers, silly girl. What an achievement," he thought. He'd submitted the sketch to his superiors today without a single mistake or remark. They would soon complete the entire order. With the upcoming bonus, he planned to take his favourite woman to a spa hotel, just the two of them. No boring Celia, no boys. Life was improving. Why did women after marriage so quickly transform into grey, ruffled creatures? His Celia was always at home, in a worn terry cloth robe, her thick hair carelessly twisted at the nape of her neck, wearing no makeup or nail polish. Even when they went out, she wore the same dress. Beautiful, but now so familiar, he was tired of seeing it. Kathy always wore something new for every date. He wondered if all women lost their allure after marriage, or if he was simply unlucky. At least Celia was too exhausted by evening to notice his lost desire for her. She was caught up in the endless cycle of household chores, a domestic merry-go-round Eddie suddenly found disgusting to watch. That evening, Eddie deliberately read bedtime stories to maintain a semblance of family harmony. While he was leisurely putting the boys to bed, tired Celia fell asleep, and the man was relieved to avoid the nightly ritual of hugging and kissing her. These gestures had become more painful than a toothache, though Celia sought his kiss out of old habit, more mechanically than really. At the morning, Eddie was unusually generous with his attention. It was Friday. He decided to make a grand gesture. Handing Celia a few bills for entertainment, he announced to the boys, "Here you go, my little brats. I'll be working this weekend. The project's deadline's a complete mess. You and your mother should go to the movies, visit a pastry shop, have fun, since we're all starting fresh on Monday." The friendly trio of little warriors, delighted by their father's surprise, approached their mother as a united delegation with a request. "Mum, let's keep it secret from Dad and go to the new water park near the city instead of the movies. It's such a dreary fall outside, endless gloomy rain, clouds and wind. But there, we'll feel like we're back in sunny summer by the sea." Celia smiled. Why not splash in the turquoise waters and slide down the various water slides? She had her secret savings, carefully accumulated from Eddie's household money. She knew how to navigate sales and special offers, never telling her husband about the little money she managed to save from shopping. Usually she spent these small bonuses on the boys, occasionally treating herself to a new lipstick or hair clip for her unruly locks. Now they would spend all her savings on the water park. Though tickets weren't cheap, you only live once. Eddie didn't need to know about this deviation from his suggestions. He monitored her expenses like a guard dog. On Saturday, the little spies, Alex, Terrell, Johnny, and their commander Celia, lovingly saw their father and husband off to work. The boys dutifully ate their porridge with milk and sugar, though they secretly disliked it. But Mum, Commander, insisted they needed proper fuel for their adventure. The water park was 2 hours from the city. With its high prices, they could only afford one meal there, so the little heroes followed their leader's instructions unquestionably. They could hardly believe they were headed for summer fun on this cool autumn day. Everyone napped on the bus, having risen earlier than usual for a Saturday. At the water park, their drowsiness vanished instantly. It was spectacular. Cascading pools of varying depths stretched beneath artificial palm trees. Colourful slides, ranked by difficulty level, stood tall. Rows of loungers lined the deck, and fluffy towels were everywhere. The food court housed restaurants and cafes, filling the air with enticing aromas of coffee, vanilla, and fresh pastries. At first, Celia felt briefly self-conscious in her old faded swimsuit from her youth camp days. But within half an hour, they were all splashing carelessly in the children pool. Since Johnny needed supervision, they stayed together. 3 hours in the aquamarine water, warm, clean and cosy, passed in what felt like minutes. The whole team suddenly realized they were famished. They decided to seek out a modest cafe serving simple fast food rather than elaborate dishes. Changed into dry clothes, Celia and the boys set out to explore. Behind the glass walls of the restaurants, it was lively. A brisk swim had whetted everyone's appetite. Suddenly, Alex, who was walking ahead of the group, grabbed Celia's hand. "Mum, look! Dad is sitting at a table with some woman in a red dress." Celia decided that Alex was just overtired with swimming, but the reality before her was darker than any horror. Just 5 meters away, behind the glass wall, at a richly set table, her Eddie was cooing with a pretty young woman. She knew her husband's mannerisms well, the obliging tilt of his head, the eyes sparkling with passion, that happy smile. It was precisely how he had been during their early courtship days. Judging by how the woman whispered in his ear and how he languidly rolled his eyes, These two were already intimate. Celia's vision darkened at the sight. Her sons shuffled beside her and struggled to find words to explain what they had witnessed. The decision came instantly. Putting on a cheerful mask with a calm smile, she explained, "Dad mentioned he had an off-site business meeting at a restaurant. Work isn't always done in an office. Many issues are resolved in a relaxed atmosphere. We should leave quickly before he sees us. We won't tell Daddy our secret that instead of going to the movies, we were at the water park, which we weren't supposed to spend money on." Her little sons nodded, promising to keep quiet. Celia hugged them warmly and guided them towards the exit. There was a cosy cafe with home cooking nearby, where they could have lunch. Her thoughts raced frantically. What an odd choice for a romantic rendezvous. True, the restaurant was fashionable, newly opened and popular, but its location in a water park seemed ill-suited for lovers' meetings. Celia tried to bury her anguish beneath these scattered thoughts. There are people who put their souls on the family altar, give their whole lives without a trace, but they can never forgive betrayal and treachery. She was one of those people. Eddie was now permanently scorched from her heart. She knew with certainty she no longer had a husband. Celia counted her cash, setting aside bus fare. The remainder would cover just 4 bowls of chicken broth and 4 meat pies. It would be enough until they got home. Thankfully, she was returning to work on Monday. Perhaps she could get an advance. She thought of Eddie as a stranger now. There were no tears, only a scorched emptiness inside. She would file for divorce, but first she would teach him a lesson. That evening, Eddie called. He apologized for not coming home, claiming there was no point in leaving the office for just a few hours. The meeting was in progress, he said. Rest would come later. Celia listened with surprising indifference. For the first time, she felt relieved not having to cook his dinner. She and the boys would make potatoes and wieners. She'd send them to watch cartoons while she sorted through her closet. She needed to look presentable for her first day at work. On Monday, Celia was tasked with designing wedding decorations in rustic style by Saturday. The celebration would feature wooden cabins in a forest clearing. The restaurant itself matched the rustic theme. No orchids or roses, only daisies, bellflowers, clematis and cornflowers. Celia could hardly believe her luck. She had been given complete creative control with minimal supervision. Such trust was empowering, motivating, inspiring. She worked diligently to prove herself worthy. The results exceeded all expectations. The following Monday, she received her first payment for her floral designs. On her way home, she bought 2 boxes of pastries and Saturday movie tickets for herself and the boys. Miraculously, she still had a lot of money left over. Her financial independence from her husband meant everything to her now. The sight of that lying cheat disgusted her, though it still stung a bit. At home, Eddie failed to notice that his loving wife had become a stranger. Cold and distant, she placed his dinner on the table like an automaton before retreating to the children's room. She slept in the living room. He seemed to prefer it this way, not a word of complaint. She had found her strategy. "Dinner's ready. I'll be late tomorrow. Pick up the kids from daycare. I need the bathroom at this time in the mornings." Without explanation, she stopped brewing his coffee, stopped asking what to cook, stopped asking him to help her with the children. This ice queen no longer asked for money either. Eddie remained oblivious to it all. He was still enchanted by his outing with Kathy to the water park restaurant, fantasizing they were by the sea under palm trees, not realizing this paradise was just a mirage, all artificial. He was delighted to have treated her so lavishly. Though she hadn't wanted to swim, she had happily shown off her new dress, bought with his money. For the first time, she had stayed with him all night, not just for a couple of hours. It had been a sensual fairy tale. He eagerly anticipated the next time, ignoring his wife's changed behaviour. Now, in the family, there were only 2 icebergs crossing in the evenings, cold, wintry, with hearts encased in frost. The ice cracked with a heated argument when Celia received her first full-fledged salary and a small bonus to go with it. At first, Eddie cautiously inquired about the amount, then was stunned by such a large sum. He had never earned so much before, and immediately began plotting ways to get this money from his wife. But Celia preempted him. "Eddie, sit down, we need to talk. I've decided to divorce you. Our family has long been just a facade of former happiness and well-being. I realise now that all these years with you, I've lived in a fog, constantly counting every penny, never able to buy myself or my children even a fraction of what we wanted. You're a miser. I know that for certain now, but that wasn't even the final straw. I discovered your lie about Patricia needing to go to a sanatorium. Yesterday I visited your mother, whom you've completely abandoned. I brought her food, medicine, and food for Leo. Did you know she hasn't been able to leave her house for over a month because her legs are so bad? That it's not us, too wrapped up in our own affairs, but kind-hearted neighbours who help her. Has your mistress completely consumed all the attention of the devoted son? How could you neglect your elderly mother?" Eddie froze. What a revelation. Celia knew about Cathy and had kept quiet, but how did she find out? He was torn between elation and despair, uncertain whether to pack his bags and rush to Cathy on wings of love, or wait. Such matters couldn't be decided hastily. He hadn't known his wife could bare her teeth. Meanwhile, Celia's monologue shifted to practical matters. She firmly informed Eddie that he had 2 days to move out of her grandparents' apartment. She wanted neither alimony nor help from him, nor his participation in raising the children. She didn't want him influencing them, lest they grow up to be misers with cold, indifferent hearts. Eddie listened with a sneer, thinking smugly that a man without a woman is better off. Yet she planned to raise the boys alone. What a foolish woman, he thought. She'll ruin her life with this arrogance. She thinks raising 3 kids alone is simple. But I couldn't care less. I'll stay at my mother's for a couple of months, get divorced, then propose to Cathy. She's absolutely my perfect match. She's so young, only 25, and she chose me among all men, despite my age. I'm over 40, yet I've caught such a charming creature. Sometimes I can hardly believe it. Celia studied Eddie, who had never been good at masking his feelings. His face displayed everything at once: contempt and sarcasm, feigned indignation and poorly hidden joy, greed and miserliness, dreams of freedom and indifference towards Celia and their son's future. She was astonished it had taken 8 years to understand what kind of man she had married. Can a woman's naivety be so profound when love fills her heart? So they parted, like ships at night. Celia was relieved that Eddie hadn't tried to claim the apartment. The man dreamed of telling Cathy he'd soon be free, wondering only how to arrange a nice date to deliver this wonderful news. Finding no better solution, he crept to the corridor and stole money directly from Celia's purse. He felt absolutely justified in this act. He had supported this woman and her children for years. She was in debt to him. So it was totally right and honest. Now he could arrange that date with Cathy. Eddie fell asleep, thoroughly pleased with his cleverness. The next day Celia was gathering an exotic bouquet of bright blue and yellow wild irises, when suddenly she remembered about leaving her old shoes for repair nearly a month ago. The situation with the new cobbler had become awkward, especially after her conversation with old Mr. Lewis. That dialogue had left a lasting impression. She pondered the bitterness of some people's fates. The old cobbler had told her about his grandson Mark, who'd lost his toes to frostbite. He'd worked in a mountain resort village, serving as both guide and escort for tourists who sought unexplored territories. With one such group, he had encountered an avalanche. It had passed close by, not hitting them directly but burying them in snow. He'd spent his remaining strength rescuing and evacuating his charges. He lost consciousness, and the shocked adventurers delayed notifying emergency services about their stranded guide. He survived miraculously. While he recovered and underwent months of rehabilitation, his wife found someone else. Or perhaps she'd had this lover all along. Upon returning to the city after his recovery, he found that his little daughter now called another man daddy. For her sake, he and his wife separated amicably. Mark never tried to prove to the girl he was her biological father. When Mr. Lewis heard about all this, he called his grandson to him. There was no need for anyone to suffer alone. During Mark's childhood and youth, Mr. Lewis had taught him shoemaking, and later the young man turned it into a hobby. He sometimes made such beautiful handmade shoes that you couldn't take your eyes off them. The cards were in his hands now. Mr. Lewis was exhausted of maintaining his business, so it was time for Mark to pick up the baton. So now, after work, Celia rushed to the cobbler, and to her great pleasure, she had money to pay him for the work, so she felt confident. The man greeted her with a smile, not reproaching her at all for being away so long. "Good afternoon, my dear customer. It's fortunate that you didn't come right away. I must confess I couldn't restore your shoes. They fell apart in my hands as I worked on them. But I didn't give up. I cut and sewed new ones, according to the size of your old pair. Look what I've created." Celia held in her hands the pair of shoes Mark had crafted for her, and she could hardly believe her eyes. How could those Italian shoes compare to this masterpiece? Though she wasn't an expert in footwear, even at first glance it was obvious that Mark possessed an undeniable talent. The shoes were graceful, durable, with soft leather, a beautiful flesh-coloured finish, unique style, and a solid, comfortable heel. She tried them on immediately, and they embraced her feet perfectly. Mark watched her with pleasure, then said, "I won't take any money for the work. I've watched you for a long time, how you care for your boys, carry heavy bags home after work, rush to your job in the morning. A woman like you makes me want to protect you from life's hardships. I apologize for being so direct, but there's no use in hiding my feelings." Celia was taken aback. "How can that be? You've put in so much work. These shoes, and I can't thank you properly. That's not right. Listen, I know your name is Mark, and I'm Celia. Tomorrow is Saturday, and my sons and I have our dumpling-making day. Even little Johnny helps when I make homemade dumplings. Please come visit us." Mark only sighed in response. "Thank you, Celia, for such a kind invitation. My grandfather told me he shared my story with you. Why would you want even just a disabled friend? My wife told me directly that I should leave. She said she couldn't live with me anymore, that I couldn't earn a living, couldn't feed my family. She used some other cruel words too. She said that as a man I was no longer whole, that I wouldn't be able to provide as I should." Celia looked at him thoughtfully. "Mark, I'm sorry you had to hear such terrible things. I'm a grown woman who provides for and raises my children alone. Forget all that nonsense about what men or women should do. Any partnership is about two people contributing to the relationship. It doesn't matter who earns the money or who tends the home fire. Besides, there's another side to this. You have an extraordinary talent for shoemaking. Trust me, people will line up for your shoes. All the fashionistas would be honoured to wear shoes, like the ones you made for me. I'll show your work to my boss. He has extensive connections in the city and many clients in different circles. We'll talk about this again, and for now, I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. And since I know you wouldn't want to come empty-handed, you can bring tomato juice and sour cream. That's how we like our dumplings. Eddie couldn't understand why Kathy was in a bad mood again. He had followed all her orders, even taking a courier part-time job to get more money for her. He delivered heavy food orders from supermarkets in any weather, carrying them up flights of stairs without elevators, looking submissively at customers, hoping for tips. He brought money home practically in his teeth, yet she kept saying it wasn't enough. How had the 5 of his family survived on much less before? The food had always been hot and delicious, then. And recently, Kathy had insisted he move back in with his mother. She didn't want to see him around all day. So now Eddie lived in constant fear that his mistress would find someone younger and wealthier. She had never agreed to change her status from girlfriend to wife. Besides, Eddie felt no guilt that it was Celia, not he, who had sent his mother to the sanatorium while he was busy with his passion's whims. In his opinion, his ex-wife had become too proud, heading a division in a network of flower shops where everyone respected her and hung on her every word. Oh, what a boss she is, he thought. Moving flowers in pots isn't exactly rocket science. As for Celia, she now looked back on her marriage to Eddie with amazement. What a meek little sheep she had been for 8 years, living such a miserable life with such a husband. At least she no longer had to scour shopping apps for grocery store sales. Her sons have grown up even more, though still maintaining their childish charm. The middle one, Terrell, is soon starting 1st grade in a new uniform. No hand-me-downs from his elder brother this time. Johnny proudly strolls through the garden in magnificent sandals that Uncle Mark made for him. No one else has such bright and comfortable footwear, adorned with fairy tale appliques. Celia hadn't told her now closest friend Mark that she'd been collecting photos of his work all year. He continues crafting shoes, sandals, clogs and sneakers from his own sketches, guided by his vibrant imagination. Just as a portfolio of her flower arrangements had once led to her beloved profession, giving her confidence, a decent income, and recognition in the floral world, Celia recently discovered an online article about an upcoming exhibition in Italy, where master shoemakers from around the globe would gather. She found the event contact information, had her message professionally translated to Italian, and sent an email with photos of Mark's creations attached. Though the chances of getting noticed seemed slim, she believed that only those who take the first step complete the journey. While Celia harboured feelings for her cheerful friend, she hesitated to show initiative or persistence, since Mark hadn't displayed any obvious romantic interest. Indeed, she barely had time for romance. Every city event now required her participation. She decorated restaurant halls, while they impressed banquet guests with their culinary talent. Together it created something truly special, and orders were plentiful. Another month passed in a whirl of celebrations and floral arrangements that Celia invariably prepared. One weekend, she finally checked her personal email and discovered news from Italy. Mark had been invited, not as a main participant, but as an honoured guest. The Italians, true to their reputation for eloquence, filled the message with words like bellissimo, alla moda, and magico. From their enthusiastic invitation, Celia gathered that they found Mark's work beautiful, fashionable, and even magical. They awaited him in Milan, hoping he'd bring samples for the final exhibition. Celia's heart soared. I shall arrange everything for the trip myself and simply present Mark with the facts. Mark was stunned by her news. Celia, what are you thinking? The Milanese masters are in a different league entirely. To them, I'm nothing but sand under the hot sun. The gods don't descend from Olympus to mingle with mortals without reason. And what would I even show? I sell my work at fair prices to ordinary people. Your boys wear my shoes happily, but they're simple everyday items, nothing extraordinary. These contests require advanced preparation, and we have just weeks. Thank you, but your efforts were wasted. I'm not ready for Milan. It's absurd to expect anything to come of this. Celia was devastated, but refused to pressure her friend. The matter was forgotten, and the Italians never reached out again. The fashion world, after all, doesn't extend invitations twice. Fame is an honourable pursuit, but success must be freely chosen. Mark's reluctance to take the Italian opportunity dampened Celia's enthusiasm. She concluded that the old saying about initiative being punishable held truth. As New Year approached, she immersed herself in creating pine and floral arrangements for countless corporate parties. Life continued, with Mark's visits becoming rare. Celia and the children planned to spend New Year's at home. For something special, they planned to visit the water park on New Year's Eve. They hadn't been there since that fateful encounter with Eddie, but now they felt ready. Despite it being December 31st, the turquoise pools were predictably crowded. They had great fun on the slides, lying on soft towels on the deck chairs. They ran for hamburgers and Coke a couple of times as time slipped away. As the group headed toward the exit, Celia suddenly stopped, dumbfounded. It couldn't be. She was having déjà vu. Eddie's mistress sat at the same table behind the glass, wearing the same red dress, though with a different man. Celia hesitated. The woman in the red dress gazed languidly into this gentleman's eyes. A different hero, but the same heroine in this living painting. Celia realized her ex-husband had lost this battle for his unearthly love. Meanwhile, the evening before New Year's Eve, when they got home, was filled with surprises and magic. At 8 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Patricia stood at the threshold. "You won't send me away, Celia? I came to thank you. After those 2 months at the sanatorium, the treatments helped my knees work much better. I've started going out a bit. I came to visit you. I don't want to celebrate New Year with Eddie. My relationship with him has completely fallen apart. You've always been dear to me. Will you accept an old woman?" Celia warmly embraced her mother-in-law. "Of course I won't send you away. I'm happy to have you. The boys will be overjoyed to see you." But the family's adventures weren't over. An hour before midnight, another timid ring came at the door. Alex opened it and soon ushered an embarrassed Mark into the hall by the Christmas tree, carrying a box decorated with bright bows. "Hi. Grandpa's old friend invited him over for the holiday. What am I to do? Celebrating New Year's Eve alone? So maybe there will be a place for me at your lovely table?" Alex, Terrell and Johnny immediately surrounded Mark, eyeing the box curiously as he produced 3 bags of presents for them. Then he turned to Patricia with a smile. "For you, dear lady, I have a box of excellent chocolates. Happy New Year. And for you, Celia, a marriage proposal. It usually comes with a ring, but I have another present." Mark unwrapped the paper to reveal luxurious shoes with silver buckles. Everyone in the room gasped in admiration. They were magnificent. Those shoes from the store that had sparked discord between Celia and Eddie couldn't compare. Even someone who knew nothing about fashion could see that. "Celia, if you can accept my disability, know that I've loved you with all my heart for a long time. Marry me, and to your boys, I'd like to be both a father and a mentor." An awkward silence fell. Then Johnny, first to recover, proclaimed loudly, "Mummy, since you don't have any daughters, can my brothers and I carry your veil train? I've seen princesses dressed like that at weddings." Everyone erupted in laughter a second later. The tension broke as everyone began sharing their joy and excitement at once. Celia looked at Mark, who waited eagerly for her answer, and smiled. "I'm a single woman, and a husband like you, Mark, would be a gift to any woman. Yes, I'll become your wife." Patricia's voice cut through the celebration. "Where's the champagne in this house? The midnight hour approaches and we're not ready. Let's drink to new happiness now, and when the clock strikes 12, to the new year. May it be gentler and more promising for us all. I think everyone here deserves that." Later, as the clock chimed and everyone rushed to embrace, Mark thought to himself, "I won't tell her yet that the photo of her new shoes caused a sensation at another European competition, and that I'm now formally invited to participate as a shoe designer. I have 6 months to prepare for this important event. Celia and I will have a proper wedding trip to Italy in summer. After all, a husband should provide for his family's well-being. He would win over the fashion world, and perhaps Celia would give him a daughter some day. He had grand plans for the future, but for now he was simply endlessly happy.